She thought she gave him a rusted key and a dead-end shop until his war dog uncovered a secret worth killing for. Title: My Stepmother Kicked Out a Homeless Navy SEAL. His dog found what they hid inside an iron shop when former Navy SEAL Ethan Cole was thrown off his family ranch with nothing but a rusted key. He figured it was the end of the line. The iron shop on Coldwater Ridge was falling apart, just like his life. But his loyal K9, Titan, wouldn't stop digging beneath the forge. What they uncovered wasn't just hidden metal. It was proof of a betrayal powerful enough to shake the entire valley. Comment 1 if you'd stand your ground, or 0 if you'd walk away, and tell us where you're watching from. The wind rolled down from the Bitterroot Mountains like it had something to say. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the old ranch yard, boots planted in the dirt he'd grown up on, staring at the house that no longer belonged to him. The barn doors were freshly painted. The fence posts had been replaced. Even the sagging porch had been repaired. It looked better than it ever had when his father was alive. None of it felt like home. Beside him, Titan sat in perfect stillness. The Belgian Malinois coat caught the late afternoon light, lean muscles visible beneath scarred fur. One ear carried a notch from shrapnel overseas. His amber eyes scanned the horizon with quiet calculation, never resting too long on any one thing. Ethan adjusted the strap on the duffel slung over his shoulder. The fabric was worn, just like him. Inside were a few folded clothes, some discharge papers, and the framed photograph he hadn't yet found the courage to throw away. Medical discharge. Those words still burned. He had survived 3 deployments as a Navy SEAL, survived deserts and alleyways and nights that didn't end. But it wasn't a bullet that took him out. It was the quiet afterward, the noise that never left his head, the jumpiness, the distance, the way he woke up swinging at shadows. His wife couldn't take it anymore. She said she loved him, but she couldn't reach him. Now he stood on land that used to anchor him, and even that was slipping away. The front door opened. Linda Cole stepped onto the porch with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. She wore a pale blue blouse and dark slacks, her blonde hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. She didn't look at Ethan right away. Instead, she glanced at Titan. "That dog better not step on the new sod," she said flatly. Titan didn't move. His gaze shifted to her, assessing. Ethan's jaw tightened. He won't. She descended the porch steps slowly, heels tapping against wood. In her hand was a small envelope. "The sale closes tomorrow," she said. "The buyers are coming from Boise. They want possession immediately." Ethan nodded once. He had expected this. The ranch had been struggling for years after his father died. Taxes piled up. Repairs delayed. He hadn't been here to help. He'd been halfway across the world, chasing wars that didn't end. "I'm not asking for anything," he said evenly. Linda's lips pressed thin. "Good." The word hung between them like a crack in ice. "For what it's worth," she added, though her tone suggested it wasn't worth much. "Your father left something in the will. It's been sitting untouched for years." She handed him the envelope. Inside was a single rusted key attached to a square metal tag stamped with fading letters. Coldwater Ridge, Ironworks. Ethan's breath caught, just slightly. "My dad's shop?" he asked. "Abandoned. Condemned twice. Property taxes are overdue again." She folded her arms. "It's yours. The deed transferred this morning." He stared at the key in his palm. It was heavier than it looked. Cold. Real. "You're giving me a debt," he said. "I'm giving you what your father insisted on." Her voice sharpened. "He refused to sell it before he died. Sentimental nonsense. If you don't want it, let the county seize it." The wind shifted, lifting dust across the yard. Memories flickered uninvited. His father laughing at the forge, sparks rising like fireflies into the night. The smell of hot iron and coal, the steady ring of hammer on anvil. Back then, the shop had felt like a cathedral. Now it was a burden. "I won't fight you on the ranch," Ethan said quietly. "There's nothing to fight for," Linda replied. That stung more than he expected. Titan stood then, moving closer to Ethan's leg without command. His shoulder brushed against Ethan's thigh, solid, grounding. Linda noticed the motion and stepped back slightly. "You should go before dark," she said. "The mountains aren't forgiving." Neither are people, Ethan thought. He tucked the key into his pocket. "Where are the buyers from?" "Investment group, expanding into recreational properties. They're planning a lodge here." Of course they were. Ethan gave one final look at the barn, the windmill, the stretch of pasture where he'd learned to ride. None of it belonged to him anymore. "Take care of it," he said. Linda's expression softened for the briefest second, then hardened again. "Goodbye, Ethan." Not come visit. Not stay safe. Goodbye. He turned without another word. Gravel crunched under his boots as he walked toward his truck parked near the fence line. Titan trotted beside him, head low, ears swiveling. Halfway to the truck, Titan stopped and looked back toward the house. Not at Linda. At the land. He let out a low, almost inaudible rumble. Ethan paused. "It's done," he murmured to the dog. But Titan didn't look convinced. They climbed into the old pickup Ethan had bought, all with what remained of his savings. The engine turned over with effort before catching. As he pulled away from the ranch, the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. The road toward Coldwater Ridge climbed quickly, winding through dense pine forest. Snow still clung to the higher elevations even in early spring. The air grew thinner, colder. Ethan drove in silence, hands steady on the wheel. He should feel angry, he thought. Instead, he felt hollow. PTSD had taught him one thing: don't react. Stay controlled. Stay composed. Anger leads to mistakes. But beneath the calm surface, something smoldered. His father's shop, abandoned, condemned, left to rot. Why hadn't Linda sold it years ago? Why now? Titan shifted in the passenger seat, nose lifted slightly as if catching a scent carried on the wind through the cracked window. "What is it?" Ethan asked quietly. The dog didn't respond, but his posture sharpened. The road crested a ridge, and the old ironworks came into view. Even in the fading light, it stood out, a large, dark structure perched above a narrow bend in Coldwater Creek. The roof sagged in places. Windows were boarded. The surrounding yard was overgrown with waist-high weeds. It looked less like a building and more like something forgotten by time. Ethan slowed the truck as he approached. A foreclosure notice flapped against the front door, barely visible in the dusk. He cut the engine. The silence that followed was thick. No wind. No birds. Just the distant murmur of the creek below. Titan exited the truck first, landing lightly on the dirt. His nose swept the air. His body angled toward the structure. Alert. Ethan stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. The cold air bit through his jacket. He walked toward the door, pulling the rusted key from his pocket. "This is it," he muttered. Titan circled once around the building, then stopped near the corner of the foundation, his ears pinned forward. Not fear. Focus. Ethan inserted the key into the old iron lock. It resisted at first, metal grinding against metal. He twisted harder. With a heavy clank, the lock gave way. The door creaked open, revealing darkness inside. A faint smell drifted out. Dust, cold stone, old metal, and something else. Something Titan clearly recognized. The dog stepped forward slowly, crossing the threshold before Ethan did. Ethan hesitated, just for a second. He had walked into darker places than this, but none of them had been home. He followed Titan inside. The door shut behind them with a low thud. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the boards, Titan stood motionless, staring toward the far end of the shop, where the massive stone forge sat like a sleeping beast. His muscles were tight, his tail still. Ethan's pulse quickened. "You smell something," he whispered. Titan didn't look at him. He kept staring, as if he knew, as if something inside this forgotten iron shop was waiting, and it wasn't just rust. Ethan swallowed, feeling the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not yet, but the sense that this exile wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something else. Something Linda never intended. Titan took one slow step forward into the darkness. Ethan followed, and the forge waited. The interior of the iron shop swallowed what little light remained outside. The air was colder inside than it had been on the ridge, as if the stone walls had been holding winter hostage for years. Ethan stood still until his eyes adjusted, until shapes began to separate from shadow. The shop was larger than he remembered. Workbenches lined both sides, thick oak tops scarred by decades of hammer strikes. Tools hung in silhouette, tongs, chisels, hammers of every size, each coated in dust so thick it softened their outlines. The concrete floor was cracked, veins of weeds pushing up through old fissures near the walls. Titan moved first. He stepped forward slowly, nose low, ears forward, tail rigid. His paws made almost no sound on the cold floor. He paused every few steps, drawing in the scent of the room as if cataloging it. Ethan closed the door behind them, sealing out the fading daylight. The click of the latch echoed louder than it should have. For a moment, the silence pressed in on him. It was too quiet. Silence had never been peaceful for Ethan. Silence meant waiting. Silence meant something was about to happen. He shook the thought away. "You're home," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if he meant it for Titan or for himself. The forge stood at the far end of the shop like a monument. It was built from stacked river stone, soot-blackened and heavy. The anvil sat beside it on a thick wooden base, iron surface worn smooth from years of use. He walked toward it slowly. The smell grew stronger as he approached. Ash, metal, oil. Underneath that, something older. A faint mineral scent that clung to the stone foundation. Titan stopped several feet short of the forge. His body tightened. Not aggression. Recognition. Ethan noticed the change immediately. Titan had served 3 tours with him. He knew every subtle shift in the dog's posture. This wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was alert. Ethan crouched beside the anvil, running his hand across the cool iron surface. His fingers left clean streaks through the dust. He remembered standing on a wooden crate at 6 years old, watching his father work this very forge. remembered sparks flying up like orange stars while his father laughed. "You see that?" his dad would say. "Iron remembers heat. You just have to give it purpose." Ethan swallowed hard. His chest tightened, not from combat memory, but from something gentler and somehow more painful. He straightened and walked the perimeter of the shop, checking windows, corners, rafters. Old habits resurfaced easily. Clear the structure, identify entry points, locate blind spots. The boarded windows were intact. No broken glass, no recent disturbance. Yet Titan remained fixed on the forge. "You smell something buried?" Ethan asked quietly. Titan took one step closer, then another. He lowered his head and sniffed along the base of the stonework. His nose traced the mortar lines slowly. Ethan watched, pulse ticking just a little faster. PTSD liked to play tricks. It liked to convince him danger was everywhere. But Titan did not hallucinate. Titan did not imagine threats. If Titan sensed something, there was something to sense. Still, Ethan forced himself to slow down. "Not tonight," he said softly. "We're just getting bearings." He moved toward the office door near the back of the shop. It was closed, a small, grimy window set into its upper half. He wiped the glass with his sleeve and peered inside. A desk, filing cabinets, a tall metal safe tucked against the far wall, everything frozen in time. He tried the handle. Locked. He exhaled slowly. Of course it was. He turned back toward the forge. Titan was now sitting directly in front of it, staring at the stone base. Waiting. The wind picked up outside, rattling the boards over the windows. The sound sent a sharp spike through Ethan's nerves. For a split second, the dark shop became a different place. Concrete walls overseas, dust hanging in the air, the memory of a blast that had never quite left his ears. His breathing quickened. Titan's head snapped toward him. The dog stood and walked back to Ethan, pressing his body firmly against Ethan's leg. Grounding. Ethan closed his eyes and placed a hand on Titan's neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath the fur. "I'm here," he whispered. Titan leaned harder, refusing to let Ethan spiral. The panic ebbed. It always did when Titan was near. After a few steady breaths, Ethan moved again. He set his duffel bag on one of the workbenches and began clearing a small space near the forge. If he was going to stay here even one night, he needed order. Dust rose in soft clouds as he swept debris aside with an old push broom. He found a stack of firewood in the corner, dry but usable. He located an oil lantern on a shelf and, after a few tries, coaxed it to life. Warm light flickered across the shop, transforming the darkness into shifting gold. Under that glow, the forge looked less like a grave and more like something waiting to breathe again. Titan returned to it immediately. He sniffed the lower stones again, then scratched once, lightly, at a particular section near the bottom. Ethan froze. "Easy," he said. Titan scratched again. Not frantic, not random, deliberate. Ethan walked closer. The mortar line Titan focused on looked no different from the others at first glance. But when Ethan crouched and ran his fingers across it, he felt something. A faint unevenness. He pressed harder. One stone shifted almost imperceptibly. Ethan's heart thudded. He leaned back on his heels and studied the forge more carefully. The stones were arranged with care, but that lower section, it didn't quite match the weathering of the rest. Titan let out a low rumble. Not a warning, but insistence. "You're telling me something," Ethan murmured. He stood and walked to a nearby tool rack. Among the dust-covered tools, he found a pry bar. He hesitated. This was his first night back in Montana. He had nowhere else to go. No backup. No plan. But Titan had never been wrong before. Ethan knelt again and wedged the pry bar into the mortar seam Titan had marked. He applied pressure slowly. The stone resisted. He pushed harder. With a grinding scrape, the lower edge shifted. Dust rained down onto the floor. Titan stepped back, muscles coiled, eyes locked on the moving stone. Ethan adjusted his grip and pulled. The stone lifted just enough to reveal a thin line of darkness behind it. Not a crack. A gap. Ethan stopped immediately. He wasn't ready to open anything fully tonight. His pulse pounded in his ears, not from fear, but from the sudden awareness that this place was not just an abandoned shop. Someone had altered this forge, deliberately. He eased the stone back into place and stood. Titan looked up at him, confused but patient. "Tomorrow," Ethan said quietly. The lantern flame flickered as the wind outside shifted again. Ethan grabbed a blanket from his duffel and spread it near the forge. Titan lay down beside him without command, positioning himself between Ethan and the door. Always the guardian. Ethan leaned back against the stone base of the forge. Cold seeped through his jacket. But beneath that cold, he could feel something else. Not dread. Not yet. Purpose. He stared at the ceiling rafters as night deepened around them. His stepmother thought she had handed him debt and decay. Instead, she had handed him something hidden in stone. Titan's ears twitched once more toward the forge before he finally rested his head on his paws. Outside, the Bitterroot Mountains stood silent beneath the rising moon. Inside the iron shop at Coldwater Ridge, something waited beneath the forge. And Titan had found it. Ethan closed his eyes, knowing sleep would come in fragments. Tomorrow, he would pry the stone all the way open. Tomorrow, the iron shop would answer back. And whatever lay beneath that forge was about to change everything. But the night did not pass quietly. Ethan drifted in and out of shallow sleep, the way he had for years now. Every creak of timber became a footstep. Every gust of wind against the boarded windows turned into the distant thump of something worse. His body stayed ready even when his mind begged for rest. Beside him, Titan did not sleep at all. The dog lay still for long stretches, head resting on his paws, but his eyes remained open, alert, reflective in the lantern's dying glow. Every 15 minutes or so, he would lift his head and turn it toward the forge. His ears would sharpen, then relax, then sharpen again. Ethan felt it even through his exhaustion. Titan was waiting. Just before dawn, Titan rose without warning. He did not bark. He did not pace. He walked deliberately toward the forge. The air inside the shop had turned colder overnight. Frost clung faintly to the inside edges of the windows. Pale gray light filtered through the cracks in the boards, stretching long shadows across the floor. Titan stopped directly in front of the same stone. He lowered his head, and he scratched. Not frantic, not anxious. 3 steady strokes of his paw against the mortar seam. Ethan's eyes snapped open. He pushed himself upright, heart pounding before he fully understood why. Titan scratched again. Ethan sat still, listening to his own breathing. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to anticipation. "Easy," he whispered, though his voice felt dry in his throat. Titan didn't stop. He pressed his nose against the lower edge of the stone and exhaled sharply, as if testing airflow. Then he pawed again, harder this time. The scrape echoed louder in the empty shop. Ethan rose to his feet slowly. He grabbed the pry bar from where he'd left it against the workbench. "Okay," he murmured. "Show me." Titan stepped back just enough to give him room, but his body remained angled protectively toward the forge. Ethan knelt and inserted the pry bar into the seam. The metal bit into the mortar with a gritty sound. He pushed. The stone resisted at first. He adjusted his grip and applied more force. The stone shifted farther than it had the night before. Dust cascaded down, and the smell changed. Less cold ash, more stale air from somewhere sealed too long. Titan's body stiffened. Ethan braced his boots against the concrete and pulled again. With a grinding scrape, the stone loosened fully on one side and tipped forward several inches. Behind it was not just darkness, it was depth. A hollow space large enough for more than a simple crack in foundation. Ethan set the pry bar down and used both hands to widen the opening. The stone was heavier than it looked, but adrenaline gave him leverage. He dragged it aside just enough to reveal a steel plate beneath. Not natural, not accidental. Deliberate. A rectangular steel hatch, fitted flush within the stonework. Titan stepped forward cautiously and sniffed along its edges. There was no growl now, just confirmation. Ethan wiped dust from the surface with his sleeve. A recessed handle sat at the center of the plate. His pulse began to climb. "Dad," he whispered. He hooked his fingers beneath the handle and pulled. The hatch did not move. He tried again, harder. This time it gave, rising slowly with a metallic groan. Cold air rushed up from below, dry, untouched, carrying the scent of metal and something faintly chemical. Ethan leaned over the opening. Stone steps descended into darkness. A cellar. Titan's ears flattened briefly, then lifted again. He looked at Ethan, waiting for direction. Ethan grabbed the oil lantern and held it over the opening. The light spilled down the narrow stairwell, revealing brick walls and a small chamber below. And at the center of that chamber, a vault. Steel, industrial, reinforced. Not something a small-town blacksmith would casually install. Ethan felt the world tilt slightly. His father had never mentioned anything like this. Titan let out a low, controlled rumble. Not warning. Readiness. Ethan exhaled slowly and began descending the steps. Each footfall echoed softly against the brick. The chamber was barely large enough to stand comfortably. The vault door was waist-high and built into the far wall. A simple keypad sat beside a manual lock. No rust, no corrosion. It had been sealed carefully. Ethan crouched beside it, running his fingers across the metal surface. There was a layer of dust, but not as thick as the rest of the shop. This had been used. Recently? No. But maintained. He tried the handle. Locked. Titan moved in tight circles behind him, nose working steadily. Ethan scanned the chamber walls. Nothing else. No additional compartments. No obvious wiring. Just the vault. He climbed back up into the shop and stood silently for a moment, staring at the open hatch. His breath fogged in the cold air. His father had hidden something here. Not money in a mattress. Not old tools. A vault. Which meant protection. Which meant secrets. Titan nudged his hand. Ethan looked down at him. "You knew," he said softly. Titan's tail gave one firm, single wag. Ethan's heartbeat had shifted now. The hollow feeling from the ranch was gone. In its place was tension, sharp, focused. He moved quickly, back to the anvil, back to the workbenches, searching. If there was a vault, there had to be a way in. Titan followed his movements closely, never straying far. Ethan checked drawers, toolboxes, old aprons hanging on hooks. He ran his fingers along the underside of shelves, behind cabinets, inside empty crates. Nothing. Frustration crept in. His PTSD didn't help. The confined space, the unfamiliar ground, the sudden stakes. His breathing shortened. He forced himself to stop. Slow down. Assess. He walked back to the forge and examined the stonework more closely. The steel hatch had been built seamlessly into the foundation. Whoever installed it knew what they were doing. His father had been more than a blacksmith. Ethan's eyes drifted toward the office door again. Locked. He approached it, gripping the handle. Still firm. He stepped back and studied the doorframe. Something about the hinges felt reinforced. Titan patted over and sniffed at the bottom edge of the office door. Then he stopped. His head tilted slightly. He turned, not toward the office, but back toward the forge, back toward the hatch. He returned to the opening and sat down at its edge, staring into the darkness below. Ethan's pulse steadied again. Titan wasn't panicking. He wasn't reacting to a threat. He was pointing. Ethan knelt beside him. "All right," he murmured. "We open it." He descended the stairs again. This time he leaned closer to the vault keypad. Dust obscured most of the numbers, but 4 digits were slightly cleaner than the rest. Recently touched, or once used often. He brushed them carefully with his thumb. His father's birthday, his own birthday, his mother's birthday, or something else entirely. Ethan swallowed. He hated guessing under pressure, but Titan remained calm above him, watching from the stairwell. Trust your partner. Trust the mission. He entered the first date that came to mind, his father's birth year. Nothing. He tried his own birth year. The keypad beeped once, then fell silent. Denied. He exhaled sharply. He leaned back against the brick wall, closing his eyes for a moment. The weight of possibility pressed against him. His father had hidden a vault beneath the forge, a vault that had survived foreclosure notices and years of neglect, a vault Titan had insisted they open. Ethan looked up the stairwell. Titan's silhouette blocked part of the morning light. Waiting. Patient. Steady. Ethan felt something shift inside him. This wasn't exile. It wasn't punishment. It was something placed in his hands. Something his father had protected until he couldn't anymore. Ethan rose to his feet. He would figure out the code. He would open the vault. And whatever was inside would explain why Linda had been so eager to push him toward this place. Titan gave a soft, low huff, as if to say, "We're not alone in this." Outside, the sun rose over Coldwater Ridge, casting long gold light across the snow-dusted trees. Inside the iron shop, beneath the forge, the secret waited, and Titan refused to let it remain buried. Ethan climbed back into the main shop and sealed the hatch halfway, just enough to conceal it for now. He stood in the center of the workshop, scanning the space once more. The calm of morning felt deceptive, like the quiet before something larger. Titan walked to the door and paused, listening. Ethan followed his gaze. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, far down the ridge road, the faint crunch of tires on gravel. Titan's ears snapped upright. His body went rigid. Ethan's blood ran cold. Someone was coming, and they weren't supposed to know he was here. Ethan didn't hesitate. He moved to the window nearest the ridge road and eased a loose board just enough to peer through. Titan positioned himself slightly behind and to Ethan's right, body aligned with his leg, silent and steady. A dark pickup truck crawled up the gravel road below. Not a county vehicle. No ranch markings. Just tinted windows and a slow, deliberate pace. Ethan's pulse slowed instead of quickening. Training took over. Observe. Don't react. The truck stopped near the base of the ridge, engine idling. It didn't approach the shop directly. It just sat there, angled slightly toward the building. Watching. Titan's low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. "Quiet," Ethan whispered, resting a hand lightly on the dog's neck. They waited. After a long minute, the truck's engine cut off. A door opened. Boots hit gravel. One man. Broad shoulders, dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low. He scanned the ridge, eyes lingering on the iron shop. Ethan's jaw tightened. The foreclosure notice was still nailed to the door. From a distance, the place should look abandoned. The man pulled out a phone and lifted it slightly, as if taking a photo. Titan's rumble deepened. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly. The man lowered the phone, looked around once more, then climbed back into the truck. The engine started. The truck reversed, turned, and rolled back down the road. Gone. But not random. Ethan stayed at the window until the sound of tires faded completely. Then he turned back toward the forge. "They know," he said quietly. Titan looked at him, ears forward. Ethan walked to the center of the shop and stood there, thinking. The vault hadn't been opened for years. The hatch had been sealed carefully. Nothing visible from the outside suggested hidden steel beneath the stone. So why today? Why now? He thought of Linda's timing, the sale of the ranch, the transfer of the iron shop deed, the foreclosure notice conveniently close to final seizure, a pressure campaign, his father's death, the shop's abandonment, the slow suffocation of debt. This hadn't been neglect. It had been strategy. Ethan strode back to the forge and pulled the hatch open again. "Watch the door," he murmured. Titan moved instantly, positioning himself near the entrance, eyes fixed outward, body still as carved stone. Ethan descended into the cellar once more. The vault waited, heavy and patient. He crouched in front of the keypad again. 4 numbers were worn. Not recently, but often. He brushed the dust aside more carefully this time. The worn keys were 1, 9, 8, 7. He exhaled slowly. The year he was born. He entered the numbers. The keypad emitted a soft, single beep. Then a mechanical click echoed from inside the vault. Ethan froze. He reached for the handle and pulled. The vault door opened. Inside were neatly stacked sealed metal boxes, each labeled in his father's handwriting. Dates, codes, locations. And on top, a manila envelope with his name written across it. Ethan. His throat tightened. He pulled the envelope free and tore it open carefully. Inside was a letter folded 3 times. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. Ethan, if you are reading this, then I was right to prepare. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything. I didn't want you carrying a fight you didn't choose. But if they've pushed you toward this place, It means they believe the truth is buried with me. It isn't. Beneath this forge is evidence of illegal dumping by Black Ridge Energy. Chemical waste tied to military contracts. They poisoned the Coldwater aquifer and buried the reports. When I refused to sell this land, they turned to pressure. Threats, inspections, debt. If something happens to me, know this. It was never an accident. Ethan's breath left him in a slow, hollow stream. His father's workshop accident, the machinery malfunction, the official report, not an accident. Below the letter were flash drives sealed in plastic, a stack of paper files, lab reports, water sample analyses, satellite images. Titan's bark shattered the quiet above. Short, sharp, alert. Ethan snapped the letter shut and tucked it under his arm. Titan! The dog barked again, closer to the door this time. Ethan climbed the steps quickly and emerged into the shop. Titan stood rigid at the doorway, staring through a crack between the boards. Ethan joined him. Down the ridge road, dust lingered in the air. The same truck, only this time, it had turned around halfway down the hill. Coming back. Titan's body shifted from alert to ready. Stay, Ethan whispered. The truck climbed higher this time, engine louder against the quiet mountain air. It stopped directly in front of the iron shop. Silence. Then the engine cut off. Ethan's chest tightened. He glanced around quickly. No back exit. No cover beyond tool racks and shadows. He motioned Titan backward into the darker corner near the forge. They waited. Boots on gravel again. Closer now. A heavy knock rattled the door. County inspection, a voice called out. Ethan didn't answer. Another knock. Harder. You in there? This property's under foreclosure review. Titan's growl was low but constant. Ethan scanned the shop. The hatch was still open behind the forge, exposed. He moved fast. He closed the vault below, sealed the hatch, slid the stone back into place with controlled urgency. Dust settled imperfectly, but close enough. Titan remained by the door, ears locked on the voice outside. Another knock. Last warning! Ethan stepped forward and opened the door. The man from the truck stood there, clipboard in hand. Close up, he looked less like county staff and more like private security. You the owner? The man asked. Ethan held his gaze. Just arrived. The man glanced past Ethan into the shop. His eyes lingered on the forge, the anvil, the cleared dust near the stone base. Didn't expect anyone to move in this fast, he said casually. Ethan shrugged. Place was mine. Figured I'd check on it. The man scribbled something on his clipboard. Black Ridge Energy's got development plans in this valley. You aware? Ethan's pulse slowed. There's a lot of plans in a lot of valleys. The man smirked faintly. Would hate for you to invest time in something that won't be here long. Titan stepped forward slightly, teeth just visible beneath his lips. The man noticed. Nice dog, he said, though there was no warmth in it. He doesn't like strangers, Ethan replied evenly. The man held Ethan's stare for a few seconds longer, then stepped back. County'll be in touch, he said. He turned and walked to the truck. The engine roared to life. The vehicle rolled down the ridge road once more. Gone again. Ethan stood in the doorway until the dust settled. Titan remained at his side, muscles still tight. They didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, Ethan stepped back inside and closed the door. The shop felt different now. Not abandoned, not forgotten, occupied. He walked back to the forge and ran his hand along the stone base. "They've been waiting," he murmured. Titan looked up at him, eyes steady. Ethan unfolded the letter again and read the final line carefully. "If they've pushed you here, it means you're ready." He let out a slow breath. The hollow feeling was gone. In its place was clarity. This wasn't exile. It was inheritance. Not land. Not rust. War. Ethan looked down at Titan. "You found it," he said quietly. Titan's tail gave one controlled wag. Outside, clouds gathered over Coldwater Ridge. Inside, beneath the forge, the truth had been uncovered. And now, they weren't just being watched. They were being challenged. The fight had begun. The sky darkened early over Coldwater Ridge. Clouds rolled in heavy and low, pressing against the mountaintops as if the valley itself were holding its breath. Ethan stood inside the iron shop, lantern light flickering against the stone walls, Titan at his side. The letter lay open on the workbench. Black Ridge energy, illegal dumping, threats, not an accident. Ethan read those words again and again until they stopped feeling like a shock and started feeling like confirmation. His father hadn't been careless. He had been hunted. Titan shifted his weight, gaze fixed toward the door. Ethan closed the letter and slid it back into the envelope, then sealed the vault below the forge once more. He replaced the stone carefully, scattering dust across the seam with deliberate precision. If they came back, he wanted them to see nothing. Outside, the first drops of rain tapped against the roof. By nightfall, the mountain road was slick and silent. Ethan ate from a can of beans warmed over a small camp stove. Titan took his portion without fuss, chewing quietly, but never taking his eyes off the door. "You think they'll come back?" Ethan asked softly. Titan didn't answer, but his ears twitched. Rain intensified, drumming steadily now. Wind pushed through the cracks in the boards, carrying the smell of wet pine and cold earth. The shop's lantern cast long shadows across the forge, making the stone structure look larger than it was, like something ancient and immovable. Ethan sat with his back against the anvil base. He should have felt fear. Instead, he felt focus. PTSD had trained him to expect the worst in silence. Tonight, silence didn't last. Titan's head snapped toward the window. A second later, light flashed across the boards. Headlights. Ethan's pulse slowed. He stood without sound and moved to the side of the window, careful not to cast a shadow. Through a narrow gap between boards, he saw them. 2 sets of headlights this time. One parked near the bottom of the ridge. Another higher up, angled toward the shop. Not county. Not ranchers. Watching. Titan's growl was barely audible, deep in his chest. Ethan crouched beside him. "They're not knocking this time," he whispered. The truck stayed there, engines running. 5 minutes. 10. The rain blurred their outlines, but the beams remained steady, fixed on the iron shop like interrogation lights. Ethan's mind mapped the terrain automatically. The ridge road had only one approach and one exit. If they rushed the building, there was limited cover. He scanned the interior again. Workbenches, tool racks, the forge. He grabbed the old hunting rifle from his duffel, not to fire recklessly, but to be ready. Titan moved closer to the door, body angled, waiting for command. Another flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the trucks more clearly. One door opened. A figure stepped out, the same broad-shouldered man from earlier. He didn't approach this time. He just stood in the rain, staring up at the shop, as if daring Ethan to react. Titan's posture tightened. Ethan placed a hand lightly on his collar. "Not yet," he murmured. The man remained outside for several long seconds, then lifted his phone again. A photo, or a message. Then he climbed back into the truck. Both vehicles remained for a few minutes longer before their engines revved, and they descended the ridge slowly, taillights disappearing into the darkness. Silence returned. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded. Ethan lowered the rifle and exhaled. "They're testing us," he said. Titan turned his head slightly, as if in agreement. The rain continued for another hour before easing into a cold drizzle. The wind died down. The mountain settled. Ethan didn't sleep. He sat near the forge, Titan beside him, replaying the scene in his mind. Black Ridge hadn't waited years just to let this go. They wanted the shop, and whatever was beneath it. Near midnight, Titan rose abruptly, not to bark, not to growl, to listen. Ethan followed his gaze toward the back of the shop. The faintest sound, metal brushing against wood. Ethan's heart slowed again. Not panic. Precision. He moved silently toward the back wall, Titan at his side. The sound came again. A soft scrape near the boarded window. Someone was trying to test the boards. Ethan positioned himself to the side of the window, rifle angled low but ready. Titan stood frozen, muscles coiled. The scraping stopped. A shadow shifted outside. Ethan could see it faintly against the dim glow of the overcast sky. Another scrape. Then silence. Ethan waited. Seconds stretched. Minutes. Nothing. Finally, footsteps retreated through wet gravel. A door closed softly somewhere in the dark. Engine ignition. One truck this time. It drove off without headlights. Ethan stayed where he was until the sound vanished completely. Titan's growl faded. The shop returned to stillness. Ethan leaned his forehead briefly against the cold wall. "They're escalating," he said quietly. Titan pressed his shoulder into Ethan's leg. This wasn't bluff anymore. It wasn't intimidation from a distance. They were probing, looking for weakness, looking for fear. Ethan walked back to the forge and rested his hand on the stone. His father had built this place like a fortress. Hidden vault. Reinforced stone. No visible access. But Black Ridge believed something here mattered enough to pressure, to watch, to threaten. Ethan looked down at Titan. "You found it before they did," he said. Titan's tail moved once. Outside, the clouds parted slightly, revealing a faint crescent moon above Coldwater Ridge. The rain had washed the dust from the yard, leaving clean tracks where the trucks had idled. Evidence. Ethan stepped outside briefly and studied the tire marks in the wet gravel. Heavy tread. Industrial. He memorized the pattern. Then he returned inside and barred the door from within. He checked the windows again, reinforcing boards where needed. Titan followed every movement, refusing to settle. When Ethan finally sat near the forge again, Titan lay down but kept his head upright, eyes trained toward the entrance. "You don't rest until I do," Ethan murmured. Titan blinked slowly, but did not lower his guard. The night stretched on. The weight of challenge settled into something steadier. Ethan wasn't just protecting property anymore. He was protecting proof, and whoever sat in those trucks knew it. Near dawn, Titan finally lowered his head for a brief moment. Ethan watched the dogs breathing even out, slow and deep. He felt something shift inside him. The exile had ended. The isolation had ended. This was no longer about what Linda had taken from him. It was about what Black Ridge wanted buried. And they were willing to push. Ethan rose before sunrise and walked to the forge once more. He knelt, running his hand across the stone seam. "They won't scare us out," he said quietly. Titan lifted his head and met his eyes. The mountain air outside was cold and clear now. The storm had passed, but the watching lights had made one thing certain. Black Ridge energy was not waiting. They were moving. And next time, they might not just watch. Morning came thin and pale over Coldwater Ridge, washing the iron shop in a quiet gray light that felt almost peaceful after the night before. The storm had cleared, leaving the air sharp and clean. Pine needles glistened with leftover rain. Coldwater Creek murmured below the ridge as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Ethan stood just inside the open doorway of the shop, coffee steaming faintly from a dented metal cup in his hand. Titan stood beside him, alert but calm now, scanning the valley in slow, deliberate sweeps. 2 tire tracks cut through the wet gravel at the bottom of the slope. Clear, heavy, intentional. They hadn't come by accident. Ethan closed the door and walked back toward the forge. The stone seam looked ordinary again, dusted over carefully. No sign of the vault beneath it. He knelt and lifted the stone once more, descending into the cellar with Titan at his heels. The vault door stood open where he'd left it after confirming the code. Inside, the sealed evidence boxes were untouched. He reached deeper into the vault this time. Behind the stacks of documents, tucked against the back wall, his fingers brushed canvas. He pulled it free. A small, heavy pouch, secured with waxed twine. He untied it slowly. Bundles of cash. $100 bills, tightly wrapped and stacked with care. Ethan stared at the money in silence. There was more than enough to settle the property taxes. More than enough to rent a place somewhere else. More than enough to disappear quietly and leave Montana behind. He exhaled slowly. PTSD had taught him something else besides vigilance. It had taught him exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones and convinces you that fighting isn't worth the cost. He could leave. He could take Titan and drive south. Find a quiet town in Arizona or New Mexico. Get a job fixing engines. Avoid headlines. Avoid corporations. Avoid nights with headlights on the ridge. He looked at Titan. The dog stood at the base of the steps, watching him without judgment. "You wouldn't mind," Ethan murmured. "You'd follow me anywhere." Titan's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Ethan climbed back into the main shop and sat heavily on a wooden stool beside the anvil. He set the pouch of money on the workbench. It looked almost harmless in the morning light. Escape money. He ran a hand across his face. His father's letter lay folded in his jacket pocket. "If something happens to me, it was never an accident." Black Ridge Energy had already shown their hand. The trucks, the inspection visit, the late-night probing at the windows. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was pressure. Ethan's breathing shortened slightly. He recognized the creeping edge of panic before it fully formed. The mountain felt smaller suddenly. The shop felt tighter. The cellar beneath the forge felt like a trap. Titan moved closer and placed his head firmly against Ethan's thigh. Grounding. Ethan closed his eyes and rested his hand on the dog's neck. "I'm tired," he admitted quietly. Titan didn't shift. He didn't push. He simply remained there. Solid. reliable. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at the pouch again. His father had left him a choice. Not just evidence. A way out. The easy road. He stood and walked toward the door, the pouch still in his hand. Outside, the valley stretched wide and beautiful beneath the morning sun. Snow lingered on the distant peaks. The world looked clean and untouched. It would be simple to drive away before noon. No confrontation. No war. No reopening old wounds. He stepped down from the porch and looked at the ridge road. Empty. Quiet. For now. Titan followed and stood beside him, staring at the same road. Ethan imagined the trucks returning, the intimidation growing sharper, the threats escalating. He imagined Titan caught in the crossfire of something that wasn't his fight. The thought twisted in his chest. He looked down at the dog. "You already gave enough," he said softly. Titan's tail moved once, steady and sure. Ethan walked back inside. The shop felt different in daylight. Less like a tomb. More like potential. He walked to the forge and ran his hand across the stone again. His father had stood here, fought here, refused to sell. Not because of sentiment, because of truth. Ethan walked to the anvil and struck it lightly with a hammer he'd picked up from the bench. The sound rang out clear and strong, filling the shop with a tone that vibrated deep in his chest. It startled him, not because of volume, because of memory. His father's voice over that same sound. "Stand your ground, Ethan. Iron doesn't bend unless you make it." Ethan swallowed hard. He looked at the pouch one more time, then he carried it back down into the cellar. He placed it carefully inside the vault. Not in his duffel, not in his truck. Back where it belonged. When he climbed out of the cellar and sealed the hatch again, something inside him had settled. He wasn't leaving. He wasn't running. Titan watched him closely, reading the shift. Ethan knelt in front of the dog. "I don't know how this ends," he said, "but we're not done." Titan stepped forward and placed one paw gently against Ethan's knee. Agreement. Ethan stood and walked to the workbench, spreading out the documents his father had left. Water test results. Chemical analyses. Satellite images showing disposal sites near the creek. Contracts bearing Black Ridge's name. Evidence. Not suspicion. Proof. He would need help. He couldn't take on a corporation alone. But first, he would secure this place. Ethan spent the next several hours reinforcing the doors, repositioning heavy tool cabinets to create better cover angles, mapping the shop interior in his mind as if it were a compound overseas. Titan shadowed every movement. When Ethan finally paused near midday, sweat dampened his shirt despite the cold air. He leaned against the forge and looked at Titan. "They want us gone," he said. Titan's ears lifted slightly. "But they're not getting this without a fight." Outside, sunlight brightened the ridge. Birds returned to the trees. The valley resumed its normal rhythm. But beneath that calm, a line had been drawn. Ethan had made his choice. He wasn't running. He was staying. And staying meant consequences. Titan stepped toward the door again, head high. Ethan followed his gaze. Far down the ridge road, a single dark SUV had stopped again. This time, it didn't idle. It didn't circle. It just sat there, watching. Ethan felt no panic now, only resolve. He rested his hand on Titan's back. "Let them watch," he said quietly. The calm had returned, but it was the kind of calm that comes before something breaks, and when it did, Ethan knew exactly which side he would stand on. The sun dipped behind the Bitterroot Peaks, and Coldwater Ridge slipped into shadow once more. The air grew brittle and sharp. Ethan had spent the day reinforcing the shop, checking blind spots, memorizing angles. He hadn't seen the SUV move from the ridge road for hours, but he knew it was there, watching. By nightfall, the temperature dropped hard. Frost crept along the edges of the windows. The shop's interior was lit only by the low glow of the lantern near the forge. Titan lay beside the door, head resting on his paws, eyes open. Waiting. Ethan sat on a stool near the anvil, rifle within reach, documents locked back in the vault. He'd eaten little. Adrenaline dulled hunger. The night was too quiet. No wind, no insects, no distant engines, just the faint murmur of Coldwater Creek below. Then Titan's head snapped up, not gradually, instantly. His body rose from the floor without a sound. Ethan didn't ask what he heard. He trusted the signal. He reached for the rifle and moved to the side of the door, positioning himself out of the line of sight from the window boards. Titan's ears angled toward the rear wall of the shop, not the door, the back. A soft metallic click echoed faintly through the shop. Someone was at the back window, testing. A second later, wood creaked under pressure. Ethan's breath slowed. 3 steps, 10 feet, clear the angle. He motioned Titan back with a subtle hand signal. The dog retreated 2 paces, but stayed ready, muscles tight. The creak turned into a crack. A board snapped, then another. Boots hit dirt outside. More than one. Ethan shifted his stance, heart steady. The back door rattled violently. "Open it!" a muffled voice hissed. Titan's growl rumbled through the shop like distant thunder. The door shuddered again. Metal scraped against metal. They were using tools. Ethan moved swiftly across the interior, using the workbenches as cover. He extinguished the lantern with a quick breath, plunging the shop into near-total darkness. Let their eyes adjust wrong. Let them think he was unprepared. The back door burst inward with a violent crack of splintering wood. 2 figures entered, silhouettes against the faint moonlight outside. Masks, dark clothing, professional. Titan waited for the signal. One intruder stepped forward, scanning the interior with a small flashlight. The beam cut through dust and shadow. Ethan remained motionless behind a stack of tool cabinets. The second intruder moved toward the forge, toward the hatch. Titan lunged, silent until impact. His body collided with the intruder's arm, knocking the flashlight free. The beam spun across the floor, throwing chaotic light into the shop. The first intruder swore and reached for something at his waist. Ethan moved. He stepped into view with controlled force. "Stop!" he commanded, voice steady and loud. The intruders froze for a fraction of a second. Titan had the second man pinned against a workbench, teeth bared, growling low but not striking. The first intruder swung an object, metal flashing in the light. A blade. Titan reacted before Ethan could. He released the second man and pivoted, intercepting the movement. A flash of steel, a sharp yelp. Titan staggered. Ethan closed the distance in 2 strides and drove his shoulder into the attacker, knocking him sideways against the forge. The blade clattered across the floor. The second intruder scrambled up and bolted toward the broken back door. "Go!" he shouted. The first man shoved away from Ethan and followed. Within seconds, both figures disappeared into the darkness outside. The sound of an engine roared to life beyond the ridge. Tires spun in gravel. Gone. Silence crashed back into the shop. Ethan dropped to his knees beside Titan. The dog stood trembling, ears pinned back slightly, breathing heavy but controlled. "Easy," Ethan whispered. He ran his hands over Titan's shoulders, down his side. Then he found it, a dark patch spreading along Titan's flank. Blood. Ethan's chest tightened. "Stay with me," he murmured. Titan's eyes locked onto his, steady, trusting. Ethan pressed his jacket against the wound, applying pressure. The cut wasn't deep, but it was long, slicing through muscle near the ribs. Titan didn't snap, didn't whine. He endured it the same way he had endured blast shock and heat overseas. "Hold on," Ethan whispered. He lifted Titan carefully, ignoring the strain in his own body. The truck keys were already in his pocket. He carried Titan outside and placed him gently in the passenger seat of the pickup. The ridge road was slick with frost and loose gravel, but Ethan didn't slow. Cold air rushed through the open windows as he drove. "Stay with me," he repeated. Titan's head rested against the seat, breathing controlled but shallow. The small town below Coldwater Ridge came into view like a scatter of yellow lights against black farmland. Ethan pulled into the gravel lot of the only veterinary clinic in town, brakes screeching slightly. He jumped out and carried Titan to the door, pounding on it. "Help!" Lights flicked on inside. Moments later, a woman in scrubs pulled the door open. Dr. Rachel Monroe. Her eyes widened when she saw the blood. "Bring him in," she said immediately. Ethan laid Titan on the stainless steel table inside the clinic. Rachel moved quickly, assessing the wound. "Knife?" she asked. Ethan nodded once. Rachel didn't press further. "Good news," she said after a moment. "It missed anything critical. He's going to need stitches and rest, but he'll be fine." Ethan exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Titan's eyes never left his. Rachel cleaned the wound carefully while Ethan held Titan's head, speaking softly the entire time. "You did good," he whispered. "You did your job." Titan's tail moved faintly against the metal table. Outside, Coldwater Ridge remained quiet and cold. Inside the clinic, under fluorescent light, the reality settled in. This wasn't surveillance anymore. It wasn't intimidation. They had crossed a line. They had drawn blood. When Rachel finished stitching the wound, she placed a bandage gently across Titan's side. "He's tough," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Yes," he replied. "He is." He stayed beside Titan until the sedation wore off and the dog could stand again. When they finally stepped outside into the frozen night air, Ethan looked back toward the ridge. The iron shop sat dark above the valley, not abandoned, not forgotten, targeted. He rested his hand on Titan's neck. "This is war now," he said quietly. Titan leaned into him, unshaken, and somewhere above Coldwater Ridge, hidden in darkness, the watchers realized something important. They hadn't scared him away. They had awakened him. The night air outside the clinic was brittle and cold, the kind that sharpened every breath. Ethan eased Titan into the passenger seat of the truck with care, adjusting the blanket around the bandage on his flank. "You're off duty," Ethan said quietly. Titan blinked once as if rejecting the idea entirely. Dr. Rachel Monroe stepped out onto the small concrete porch of the clinic, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. The town of Coldwater sat behind her in soft amber light. 2 blocks of storefronts, a diner sign flickering at the corner, the outline of a church steeple against the sky. "You need to file a report," she said gently. Ethan leaned against the truck door, arms folded. "And tell them what?" he asked. "That masked men broke into a condemned iron shop in the mountains and then disappeared?" Rachel studied him carefully. "You think this is bigger than that?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked back toward the dark silhouette of Coldwater Ridge rising behind town. "They didn't try to steal tools," he said quietly. "They went straight for the forge." Rachel's expression shifted, subtle but real. "You're not just reopening a shop, are you?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. He trusted her enough to bring Titan here in the middle of the night. But trust and disclosure were two different things. "My father left something behind," he said finally. "Something people don't want uncovered." Rachel didn't press. Instead, she stepped closer to Titan and scratched gently behind his ear. "He saved you," she said. Ethan shook his head. "He always does." Titan lifted his head slightly at the sound of Ethan's voice, tail thumping once against the seat. Rachel smiled faintly. "Bring him back in 2 days so I can check the stitches," she said. "And Ethan, be careful." He nodded once. As he drove back toward the ridge, dawn began to creep into the sky. Pale light stretched across the valley floor, revealing frost-coated fields and wooden fences that traced the land like old scars. Coldwater was waking up. The diner's lights flickered on. A ranch truck rolled slowly down Main Street. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life continued. Up on Coldwater Ridge, the iron shop stood still and quiet in the morning light. Ethan parked and stepped out slowly, Titan following at a careful pace. The back door still hung broken from the previous night's forced entry. Boards lay splintered on the ground. The shop no longer looked abandoned. It looked attacked. Ethan stood there for a long moment, studying the damage. Titan moved ahead of him and paused near the broken threshold, sniffing along the wood fragments. Ethan crouched and examined the splintered boards. Professional tools had been used. Quick entry. No hesitation. He stood and looked down the ridge road. Nothing moved. But he knew they would be back. Inside, the shop felt heavier in daylight. The forge loomed at the center, like a witness to everything that had happened. Ethan walked to the anvil and placed both hands on the cold iron surface. "You started something," he murmured, thinking of his father. Titan lay down beside the forge, resting carefully on his uninjured side. His eyes remained open, watching Ethan as if measuring his next move. Ethan began repairing the back door, not because he believed it would stop professionals, but because structure mattered. Order mattered. He worked methodically, replacing boards with spare lumber stacked in the corner. Each hammer strike echoed through the shop. The sound was different now. Not nostalgic, resolute. Around mid-morning, the rumble of an engine climbed the ridge. Ethan paused mid-swing. Titan's head lifted. A different truck this time. Older. Blue. Rusted at the edges. It stopped near the shop. A tall man in a worn denim jacket stepped out. Gray beard, weathered face. Ranch boots coated in dried mud. He looked up at the iron shop with quiet recognition. Ethan stepped outside. "You Coles boy?" the man asked. Ethan nodded. "Name's Harold Boone," the man said, extending a hand. "Your dad fixed my fence gates more times than I can count." Ethan shook his hand. "Appreciate you coming up," Ethan said. Harold glanced at the repaired back door. "Word travels quick in a town this small," he said. "Heard there was some trouble last night." Ethan didn't answer directly. Harold studied him carefully. "Black Ridge been sniffing around this valley for years," he said quietly. "Your father didn't like what they were doing. Didn't back down either." Ethan felt the weight of that confirmation. "You knew," he said. Harold nodded once. "We all knew something wasn't right," he replied. "But most folks got mortgages and families. Hard to fight a company that big." Titan stood and approached Harold slowly. Harold crouched down, offering his hand. Titan sniffed, then allowed a brief touch. "He's a good one," Harold said softly. "Looks like he's seen things." "He has," Ethan replied. Harold stood again. "Town's watching too," he added. "You're not as alone up here as you think." That statement landed differently than Ethan expected. Isolation had been his default state for years. Now, something else stirred beneath the surface. Community. Not loud, not dramatic, but present. Harold tipped his hat and returned to his truck. Ethan stood there for a moment, watching him drive back down the ridge. Titan moved to his side again. "They're waking up," Ethan said quietly. Inside the shop, the documents remained sealed beneath the forge. The vault was hidden. The evidence was safe, for now. But the attack had changed the equation. Ethan walked to the workbench and unfolded his father's letter again. Black Ridge Energy. Illegal dumping. Military contracts. The scope was bigger than a single valley. He needed help beyond Coldwater. Legal help. Someone who understood contracts and corporations and how to fight them in daylight instead of shadows. Ethan pulled out his phone and stared at the weak signal indicator. 1 bar. Just enough. He scrolled through old contacts. Most of them were from another life. Teammates scattered across the country. But one name stood out. Mark Delaney, former JAG attorney who had worked legal support for Ethan's unit overseas. Mark had left the service and gone into environmental law, last Ethan heard. Ethan hesitated. Calling Mark meant escalation. It meant this wasn't just a local fight anymore. Titan nudged his hand lightly. Ethan looked down at him. "You're not stepping back," he said. Titan's gaze was steady. Ethan pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then a calm, measured voice answered. "Delaney." Ethan took a breath. "Mark, it's Ethan Cole." There was a brief silence. "Ethan," Mark replied slowly. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "I need legal advice," Ethan said. "And I think you're going to want to hear what I found." He turned toward the forge as he spoke. Titan lay down beside it again, eyes alert but calm. The shop no longer felt like exile. It felt like headquarters. And for the first time since stepping off that ranch, Ethan didn't feel alone. The call with Mark Delaney lasted less than 10 minutes, but it shifted the weight of the fight. "Send me nothing over text," Mark had said, voice steady but sharpened with interest. "I'm driving up from Missoula. I'll be there by morning. Don't move anything else. Don't talk to anyone about what's in that vault." Ethan had agreed. Now, standing in the iron shop as late afternoon light poured through the cracks in the boarded windows, he felt something unfamiliar rising beneath the tension. Strategy. Titan lay stretched out near the forge, his bandaged flank visible beneath his short coat. The stitches held firm. His breathing was even. But every time a truck passed on the highway miles below, his ears lifted. Ethan knelt beside him and ran a hand gently along his neck. "You did good," he said quietly. Titan's tail thumped once against the floor. The valley below. Coldwater Ridge glowed gold as the sun lowered. Ethan stepped outside and studied the road. No SUV tonight. No headlights idling. But that didn't mean Blackridge had retreated. It meant they were adjusting. By dawn the next morning, frost clung to the grass like powdered glass. Ethan had slept in short bursts, waking each time Titan shifted position. Old habits refused to fade. A dark gray sedan rolled slowly up the ridge road around 8 o'clock. Not a truck this time. Not tinted windows. A clean, conservative vehicle with Montana plates. Titan stood and moved toward the door. Posture alert, but not aggressive. Ethan stepped outside just as the sedan parked. A tall man in his late 50s stepped out. Slim build, graying hair, simple suit beneath a weathered overcoat. Mark Delaney had aged, but his posture still carried the quiet precision of someone who once wore a uniform. He looked up at the iron shop and let out a slow breath. "Coldwater Ridge," he murmured. "Your father had a taste for dramatic backdrops." Ethan offered a firm handshake. "Appreciate you coming." Mark nodded once. "I heard your father's name mentioned in a deposition years ago," he said quietly as they walked toward the door. "Didn't realize the thread would circle back like this." Inside the shop, Mark's eyes adjusted quickly to the dim interior. He took in the forge, the anvil, the newly repaired door. Then he noticed Titan. The dog stepped forward carefully, favoring his side slightly. Mark crouched instinctively, extending his hand slowly. Titan sniffed him, then allowed the contact. "He's seen more than most lawyers I know," Mark said softly. "3 deployments," Ethan replied. "And still steady," Mark added. They moved to the forge. Ethan opened the hatch without hesitation this time. Mark followed him down into the cellar. When he saw the vault, he stopped. "Your father wasn't subtle," he said. Ethan opened the vault and handed him the sealed drives and document boxes. Mark moved methodically, scanning reports, reading labels, opening one file at a time. Water sample contamination levels, industrial discharge permits, internal Blackridge correspondence. Mark's expression shifted from curiosity to focus. "This is significant," he said quietly. "If verified, this isn't just environmental negligence. This ties directly into federal contracts." Ethan nodded. "My father knew." Mark continued scanning the files. Then he paused. "Where's the master ledger?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "There should be a consolidated financial breakdown," Mark said. "Bribes, transfer chains, the piece that links these violations to executive approval." Ethan felt his chest tighten slightly. He reached deeper into the vault, pulling out every sealed box. They opened each one carefully on the cellar floor. Reports, photographs, encrypted drives, but no master ledger. Mark leaned back against the brick wall. "Without that," he said, "Blackridge can argue these were isolated incidents, rogue managers, misinterpretations. We need the chain of command." Ethan's mind raced. The letter had said the vault contained everything. Unless his father had anticipated a breach. Titan, who had remained at the top of the cellar stairs, suddenly shifted. He let out a low huff. Ethan glanced up. Titan wasn't looking at them. He was looking toward the anvil. Ethan climbed the stairs slowly. Titan limped toward the anvil base and stopped. He sniffed along the wood, nose tracing the grain. Then he scratched lightly at the bottom edge. Mark emerged behind Ethan. "Your dog's persistent," he observed. "He doesn't repeat himself without reason," Ethan replied. The anvil base was thick oak, reinforced with iron brackets. Ethan knelt and ran his hand along the underside. Nothing obvious. Titan scratched again, this time at a slightly different angle. Ethan pressed against the wood panel Titan indicated. It didn't move. He examined the brackets more closely. One bolt looked newer than the others. Less rust. Different patina. He reached for a wrench from the nearby tool rack. Mark stepped back, watching. Ethan loosened the bolt slowly. The wood shifted slightly. Titan stepped back, eyes fixed. Ethan removed the bolt completely. A thin wooden panel slid free. Behind it, a small cavity sealed with hardened resin. Ethan's pulse spiked. He chipped away at the resin carefully with a chisel. Inside was a micro SD card, encased in clear epoxy for protection. Mark's eyes widened. "There it is," he murmured. Ethan held the tiny chip in his palm. His father had hidden redundancy. Even if the vault were discovered, the critical piece remained concealed. Titan's tail gave a faint wag. Ethan looked down at him. "You knew," he said softly. Titan blinked once. They carried the SD card into the cellar. Mark inserted it into a portable reader connected to his laptop. The screen flickered to life. Files populated. Financial spreadsheets, executive signatures, direct correspondence between Black Ridge's board and subcontractors responsible for waste disposal. Dates aligned with Ethan's father's final months. Mark leaned forward slowly. "This is the spine," he said quietly. "This proves executive knowledge, intent, cover-up." Ethan felt a surge of something close to relief. Not victory. Validation. Mark looked up at him. "This escalates everything," he said. "Black Ridge isn't just cutting corners. They knowingly contaminated a protected aquifer tied to federal land." Ethan nodded. "So we go public." Mark held up a hand. "We go strategic." He closed the laptop carefully. "First, we secure copies in multiple locations. Then we approach federal investigators, quietly. Once this hits, Black Ridge will move aggressively." Ethan understood that tone. He had heard it before in briefing rooms overseas. Titan climbed the stairs slowly and sat near the cellar entrance, watching both men. Mark looked at the dog. "He found what they missed," he said. "He always does," Ethan replied. They sealed the SD card in protective casing and returned the vault contents to their place. As they climbed out of the cellar and closed the hatch again, the forge loomed above them. The shop felt steadier now. Purpose anchored it. Outside, the ridge road lay quiet, but as Mark packed his laptop into a leather satchel, Titan's ears lifted sharply. Ethan followed his gaze to the window. Far down the ridge road, a familiar dark SUV had returned, parked, still, watching. Mark stepped beside Ethan and studied the vehicle. "They're nervous," he said calmly. Ethan's jaw tightened. "They should be." Titan stood, posture steady despite his injury. This time, there was no growl, no rumble, just resolve. The balance had shifted. Black Ridge had sent watchers. Ethan had found proof. And now, the valley itself was beginning to take sides. The SUV at the bottom of the ridge didn't move. It just sat there. Ethan stood near the window, Mark beside him, Titan steady at his leg. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the last of the frost. From a distance, Coldwater Valley looked peaceful. Patchwork fields, barns, cattle grazing. Coldwater Creek winding silver through the trees. but the stillness felt charged. "They know we found something," Mark said quietly. Ethan didn't look away from the vehicle. "They don't know what." Mark nodded. "Not yet." Titan shifted slightly, his body aligned toward the road, ears forward but calm. The aggression from the night of the break-in had settled into something sharper. Focus. Ethan closed the wooden board over the window and turned back toward the forge. "We need to assume escalation," he said. Mark placed his satchel on the workbench and reopened his laptop. The micro SD card, the piece Titan had led them to, rested inside a small protective case. "The ledger ties Black Ridge's executive board directly to the dumping sites," Mark said. "Dates match the contamination reports. Payments routed through shell contractors. It's clean evidence." "Clean enough for federal?" Ethan asked. "Yes," Mark replied. "But not without backup. We don't go straight to local law enforcement. Black Ridge's reach runs deep. We go Federal Environmental Crimes Division." Ethan nodded once. Titan limped closer to the forge and sat, watching both men as if guarding the conversation itself. Ethan crouched beside him. "You found the key," he murmured. Because that was what it was. The vault had been the obvious secret. But the anvil base, that was memory. That was foresight. His father had known. If someone forced entry into the vault, if someone seized the documents, the real leverage would remain hidden. Not in steel, in wood, in something simple. Titan rested his chin briefly against Ethan's knee. Mark looked up from the screen. "There's something else." Ethan rose. Mark rotated the laptop slightly. An additional folder sat inside the SD card's directory. One Ethan hadn't noticed at first glance. Label, secondary. Mark opened it. Inside were video files, security footage, time-stamped. Grainy but clear enough. Footage from the iron shop's interior. Years old. Ethan leaned closer. On screen, his father stood near the forge, speaking directly toward a camera mounted somewhere high in the rafters. The video crackled faintly as Mark pressed play. "If you're watching this," his father's voice began, older and rougher than Ethan remembered. Then the paper trail wasn't enough. Ethan's breath caught. His father glanced off camera briefly, then back. "They'll try to say it was negligence or mistake. It wasn't. They authorized chemical discharge near the upper tributary. I have recorded meetings. I have signed directives." He held up a binder toward the camera. "They will come for this shop. They'll try to force the land into foreclosure. That's their cleanest route." Ethan felt a chill crawl along his spine. The video ended. Mark leaned back slowly. "This wasn't paranoia," he said. "No," Ethan replied. "It was preparation." Titan let out a soft breath. Ethan stood in the center of the shop and looked around. The rafters, the boards, the forge, every beam and nail now carried weight. "They thought the vault was the heart," Ethan said quietly. "But it was the anvil." Mark nodded. "The memory key." Ethan almost smiled at that. The anvil had been the symbol of his childhood. The rhythm of hammer on iron. The steady heartbeat of the shop, and beneath it, the truth. Outside, the SUV finally shifted. Its engine started. It rolled slowly down the ridge road and disappeared. Mark closed the laptop. "They're feeling pressure," he said. "We move fast." Ethan nodded. "What does fast look like?" "Copies in secure cloud storage. Physical copies to 2 separate federal contacts I trust. A meeting request filed by end of day. Once investigators open a formal inquiry, Black Ridge can't bury this quietly." Ethan considered that. And until then? Mark looked at Titan. You hold your ground. The weight of that statement settled heavily, but cleanly. Ethan walked to the back door and checked the repaired boards again. Strong enough. For now. He turned back toward the forge. I won't move the evidence, he said. Not until it's backed up. Mark stood and closed his satchel. I'll handle duplication tonight in Missoula, he said. You stay unpredictable. Ethan understood that language. Don't create routine. Don't telegraph movements. Mark paused near the door. There's one more thing, he said. Ethan waited. Once this goes federal, Black Ridge won't send masked men. They'll send paperwork, lawsuits, smear campaigns. They'll paint you unstable. Ethan didn't flinch. They can try. Mark studied him carefully. PTSD records can be weaponized in court, he said quietly. Ethan felt that hit deeper than the threat of knives in the dark. They'll question your judgment, your credibility. Titan stepped forward slightly. Ethan placed a hand on his back. They can question me, Ethan said. They can't question the data. Mark held his gaze for a long moment. Stay steady, he said finally. Then he left. The sedan rolled down the ridge and vanished from view. The iron shop fell silent once more. Ethan walked slowly back toward the forge and rested his palm against the stone. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Alignment, purpose that didn't come from orders, but from choice. Titan settled beside him, resting carefully on his uninjured side. You're the one who made this real, Ethan said softly. Titan blinked slowly. Outside, Coldwater Valley continued its quiet rhythm. Farmers checked fences. School buses rolled along dirt roads. Smoke curled from chimneys. They didn't know the war brewing above them. Not yet. Ethan stepped outside and looked toward the horizon. Clouds gathered faintly over the mountains again. The valley might be choosing sides. But Black Ridge energy would not concede quietly. And the next move would not be subtle. It came 3 days later. Mark had confirmed receipt of the digital copies. Federal environmental investigators had quietly acknowledged the material. The inquiry was not public yet, but it was active. Black Ridge knew. Ethan felt it in the stillness. The surveillance stopped. The SUV didn't return. The ridge road remained empty. That kind of silence wasn't retreat. It was repositioning. Late afternoon light stretched long across Coldwater Valley when Ethan decided to drive into town for supplies. Titan insisted on coming, despite the fresh stitches along his flank. You're not 100%, Ethan warned, opening the truck door. Titan jumped in anyway. The small town of Coldwater buzzed gently with end-of-day routine. Kids pedaled bicycles past the diner. A rancher loaded feed sacks into his truck. Dr. Monroe stood outside her clinic speaking with an elderly couple. Life moved. But Ethan noticed the glances. Word had spread. The break-in. The black trucks. The sheriff's office had taken a statement, but done little else. People were paying attention now. Ethan bought hardware supplies and a few groceries. Titan waited in the truck, scanning the street from the passenger seat. When Ethan pulled out of town and headed back toward the ridge, the sun hovered low over the horizon, painting the valley in amber and copper. Coldwater Creek ran beneath the old wooden bridge at the base of the ridge road, a narrow crossing wide enough for one vehicle at a time. As Ethan approached the bridge, he saw them. 2 black SUVs parked diagonally across the far side, blocking the road. His pulse slowed instantly. Titan's posture sharpened. Ethan eased the truck to a stop 20 yards from the bridge. Doors opened. 3 men stepped out. No masks this time. No tools. Suits beneath heavy coats. Professional. One of them stepped forward, hands visible. "We just want to talk," he called out. Ethan opened his door slowly and stepped out. Titan followed immediately, positioning himself slightly ahead of Ethan's left leg. The creek rushed below the bridge, cold and steady. The valley wind moved through dry grass along the banks. "You're trespassing," Ethan said evenly. "This is a public access road," the lead man replied smoothly. "We represent Black Ridge Energy. No denial, no disguise." "You've been in possession of proprietary documents," the man continued. "We're offering a resolution." Ethan didn't respond. The man pulled a folder from inside his coat. "Settlement," he said. "Substantial compensation. Enough to rebuild your life somewhere else." Titan shifted forward slightly, placing himself more squarely between Ethan and the men. The lead man noticed. "He doesn't need to be part of this," he said calmly. "He is," Ethan replied. The wind lifted Ethan's jacket slightly. The man's eyes flicked to Titan's bandage. "You've already had misunderstandings," the man said carefully. "Let's not escalate further." Ethan felt anger flare, but controlled. "You escalated," he said. The second man stepped forward. "Your record," he said quietly. "Medical discharge. PTSD. Court filings could question your stability. We're trying to avoid unpleasantness." There it was. Mark had predicted it. Ethan's fingers curled slightly at his sides. Titan's ears flattened, not in fear but in warning. "You poison this valley," Ethan said, voice steady. "You bury it. Then you threaten anyone who uncovers it." The lead man's polite expression hardened. "You don't understand the scope of what you're interfering with. Try me." For a moment, the air between them tightened. Then Titan did something unexpected. He stepped forward fully. Not lunging, not barking. He simply stood tall on the narrow wooden bridge, scar visible, eyes locked on the men. Steady, unmoving. A wounded war dog who refused to retreat. The creek roared beneath them. Behind Ethan, an engine approached from town. Another truck pulled up behind him. Harold Boone stepped out. Then another vehicle. The diner owner, Maria Alvarez, phone already raised. 2 teenagers on dirt bikes stopped near the roadside. Within seconds, the confrontation was no longer isolated. The lead man glanced around. Cameras, witnesses. The balance shifted. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "Maybe," Ethan replied. "But it's my mistake to make." Maria stepped closer, filming openly. "Everything okay here?" she called out. The men from Black Ridge adjusted their posture immediately. Professional smiles returned. "Just a conversation," the lead man said smoothly. Titan did not move, not 1 inch. The silence stretched. Then, from down the valley road, a marked federal SUV appeared. Mark Delaney's timing had not been coincidence. The Black Ridge men saw it. Their confidence faltered for the first time. The federal vehicle slowed near the bridge. 2 agents stepped out, badges visible. "Is there a problem?" one of them asked. The lead Black Ridge representative cleared his throat. "No problem at all," he said. "Just leaving." He stepped back. The other 2 followed. Doors shut. Engines started. The SUVs reversed carefully and turned down a side road, disappearing from view. The bridge fell silent except for the rush of water below. Ethan stood still for several seconds. Titan remained planted in front of him, unshaken. Finally, Ethan rested his hand gently on Titan's neck. "You held," he murmured. Titan's tail moved once. The federal agents approached. "We received your attorney's submission," one said. "We'll be in touch formally. For now, avoid confrontation." Ethan nodded. Harold stepped closer. "You good, son?" he asked. Ethan looked around at the small gathering of townspeople, at Maria lowering her phone, at the teenagers whispering, at the federal SUV idling nearby. "Yes," Ethan said quietly. For the first time since stepping off the ranch, he felt something stronger than isolation. He felt backed. The valley had chosen, not loudly, not violently, but clearly. As the crowd dispersed and the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan climbed back into his truck. Titan settled into the seat beside him, breathing calm and steady. As they drove back up the ridge toward the iron shop, Ethan glanced at the bridge in his rearview mirror. Blackridge had tried intimidation in darkness. Now they had tried pressure in daylight, and it had failed. The predator had stepped into open ground and found itself exposed. Titan rested his head against the door panel, eyes half closed but alert. The fight wasn't over, but it had shifted, and this time, they were no longer being hunted. They were being heard. The shift didn't happen overnight. It unfolded slowly, like frost melting under a patient sun. Within a week of the confrontation on the bridge, federal investigators returned to Coldwater Valley with quiet authority. They collected water samples from upstream tributaries. They walked the land with survey equipment. They requested documents from Blackridge Energy through formal channels. The company responded with polished statements and careful denials, but the evidence was already in motion. Mark Delaney moved with steady precision, filing motions and protecting Ethan from legal pressure. He ensured that Ethan's medical history remained private and irrelevant to the case at hand. "You don't fight emotion with emotion," Mark told him one afternoon in the iron shop. "You fight it with documentation." Ethan nodded. The valley watched. News crews arrived, first local, then regional. They parked near the base of Coldwater Ridge and filmed wide shots of the iron shop against the mountains. They interviewed ranchers who had quietly suspected something was wrong for years. Harold Boone spoke plainly about water quality changes. Maria Alvarez described the night of the bridge confrontation. Even Dr. Rachel Monroe confirmed the attempted intimidation without exaggeration. Through it all, Titan remained at Ethan's side. The stitches healed cleanly. The scar along his flank remained visible, a thin, pale reminder of the night he intercepted steel meant for someone else. When cameras pointed toward Ethan, Titan stood steady beside him. Not aggressive, not anxious, just present. The federal investigation deepened. Satellite imaging confirmed contamination patterns. Internal Blackridge emails surfaced through subpoena. Executive signatures matched the ledger entries hidden inside the anvil. 2 months after the bridge incident, the announcement came. Blackridge Energy's regional operations were suspended pending federal charges. Several executives were named in formal indictments tied to environmental violations and contract fraud. Coldwater Valley exhaled. It wasn't celebration. It was relief. The threat that had hovered quietly for years had been dragged into daylight. Ethan stood outside the iron shop the morning the news broke, holding a folded newspaper in his hand. Titan lay beside him, eyes half closed in the warming sun. "You hear that?" Ethan murmured. They can't bury it now. Titan's tail thumped once. The iron shop no longer looked abandoned. Windows had been repaired properly. The back door replaced entirely. The yard cleared of weeds. A fresh coat of dark paint covered the weathered exterior boards. The forge inside had been cleaned and restored. Not polished to perfection, but respected. Ethan stepped into the shop and paused at the threshold. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating floating dust like drifting embers. He walked to the forge and ran his hand across the stone. For the first time since returning, he struck a match. He fed small pieces of dry wood into the forge's belly and coaxed the flame slowly to life. The fire caught gradually. Soft orange glow, then heat. Titan watched from a few feet away, head tilted slightly. Ethan worked the bellows carefully, steady rhythm building warmth inside the stone. When the iron finally reached temperature, he lifted a small rod with tongs and placed it across the anvil. He raised the hammer. The first strike rang out clear and strong. The sound echoed through the shop and out across Coldwater Ridge. It traveled down the valley like a signal. The forge was alive again. Later that afternoon, a small group gathered outside the iron shop. Harold, Maria, Dr. Monroe, a few ranchers. 2 veterans from neighboring towns who had heard about Ethan's stand. No ceremony. Just quiet acknowledgement. Ethan stepped forward and cleared his throat. This place isn't just a shop, he said. It's going to be a workspace, a cooperative, for veterans who need steady hands and steady ground. He glanced down at Titan, and for those who stood with us. Harold nodded slowly. Maria smiled. Dr. Monroe folded her arms, satisfied. The sign went up a week later. Coldwater Ironworks, Veteran Metal and Restoration. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. Work began modestly. Fence gates repaired, custom hinges forged, old ranch tools restored. Each hammer strike felt different now. Not angry, not defensive, purposeful. Ethan still had nights when sleep came in fragments, still had moments when sudden noises tightened his chest. But Titan remained at his side, grounding him with quiet consistency. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the mountains in gold, a familiar truck climbed the ridge. Linda Cole stepped out slowly, hesitating near the edge of the yard. Ethan watched from the doorway. Titan stood beside him, neutral. Linda approached carefully. I didn't know, she said after a moment. About Black Ridge. About what they were doing. Ethan studied her face. Fear had aged her in ways he hadn't noticed before. They pressured me, she continued quietly. Made it sound like you were in danger if you stayed tied to this land. Ethan didn't interrupt. I thought pushing you away would keep you safe, she said. He exhaled slowly. It didn't, he replied. She nodded. I see that now. They stood in silence for several seconds. Then she looked toward the forge inside the shop. Your father would be proud, she said softly. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at Titan. The dog's scar caught the fading light. He left more than a building, Ethan said at last. Linda nodded and stepped back. I won't interfere again, she said. When her truck disappeared down the ridge road, Ethan remained where he was. The valley below felt different now. Not divided, not tense, protected. He stepped back inside the iron shop and stood before the forge. The fire burned steady. Titan walked over and rested his head against Ethan's boot. The hammer hung in Ethan's hand. He lifted it once more and struck the glowing iron. The sound rang through the shop and carried into the open air. Not a warning, not a threat, a promise. True inheritance wasn't money. It wasn't land. It was the courage to finish what someone else began. Ethan looked down at Titan. "You found it," he said quietly. Titan's tail moved once. Outside, Coldwater Creek flowed clean beneath the wooden bridge. The ridge stood quiet. The forge burned warm. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt whole. If you believe a man should stand his ground when it comes to his land and his family's name, type yes in the comments. And if you've ever had to push back against someone who thought they could bully you off what's yours, share your story below. This community listens. Subscribe if you want more real stories about justice, grit, and holding the line right here in the land of the free.